The gray light of dawn filtered through the narrow window of cell block D as Robert "Bobby" Mitchell sat on the edge of his steel cot, staring at his weathered hands. In 3 hours, they would strap him to a gurney and pump poison into his veins. Been around the block enough times to know when it's the last stop, he thought, the chains around his ankles clinking softly as he shifted his weight. At 68, Bobby had made his peace with dying. The cancer would have gotten him in a few years anyway. The docs had been real clear about that. But Thunder, Lord, that was different. That German shepherd had been waiting 6 long years for him to come home. And Bobby knew in his bones that dog was still waiting. Mitchell. The guard's voice cut through the morning silence. "Warden wants to see you." Bobby rose slowly, his joints protesting after another sleepless night on the thin mattress. The handcuffs felt heavier than usual as Officer Stevens led him down the corridor, past the empty cells that had once housed men he'd known. Most were dead now, some by the state's hand, others by their own. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like angry wasps. Warden Catherine Morrison stood behind her desk, a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. She'd been here when Bobby first arrived, had watched him transform from a broken Vietnam vet into something resembling a man again. Now she looked at him with what might have been sympathy. "Sit down, Bobby." He lowered himself into the chair across from her desk, the chains restricting his movement. "Ma'am, you know why you're here. Final meals already ordered, turkey sandwich, black coffee. Nothing fancy." Bobby's voice was gravelly from years of cigarettes he'd quit smoking in this very room. "Reverend Hayes can say whatever words need saying." Morrison shook her head. "That's not why you're here. You have one final request coming to you. Every man on death row gets one, within reason." "What is it?" "Bobby." For a moment, Bobby's composure cracked. His hands trembled slightly as he clasped them together. "I'd like to see Thunder. Thunder. My dog. German shepherd. He's—" Bobby swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. "He's with Maggie Sullivan. She was my fiancée before all this. Thunder's been waiting for me. Dogs don't understand time like we do. He's been waiting every day for 6 years. The warden studied him carefully. "Bobby, bringing an animal onto prison grounds isn't standard protocol. It's never been done before. Not in my 23 years here. I know it's asking a lot, ma'am, but if there's any mercy left in this world—" Bobby's voice broke slightly. "I raised that dog from a pup, found him at the shelter, all beat up and scared. We fixed each other, you might say. If I'm going to meet my maker today, I'd like Thunder to know I didn't abandon him, that I never stopped loving him." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming against the desk. Through the small window behind her, Bobby could see the exercise yard where he'd walked in circles for 6 years. Always counterclockwise. Always alone. "Where's the dog now?" "With Maggie. She lives about 90 miles north, up in Millfield County. Small farm outside town." Bobby leaned forward as much as the chains would allow. "She's good people. Warden. Maggie never believed I killed Raymond Kincaid. Not for 1 second. She's been taking care of Thunder all this time, waiting for appeals that never came through." The warden picked up her phone, then set it down again. "Bobby, I can't promise anything. even if I wanted to make this happen. We're talking about a 90-minute drive, security protocols, paperwork with the Department of Corrections. Ma'am, I've been a model prisoner for 6 years, never caused trouble, helped with the younger inmates, worked in the library. I'm not asking for a stay of execution or a miracle. Just 15 minutes with my dog. Please. Morrison studied his face, seeing something there that made her decision. She picked up the phone and dialed. This is Warden Morrison at Cumberland Valley. I need to speak with Director Harrison about an unusual final request. Yes, sir, I know what time it is. While she spoke in low tones, Bobby closed his eyes and tried to picture Thunder. The dog would be 9 years old now, getting gray around the muzzle, maybe moving a little slower. But those ice-blue eyes would still be sharp, still full of the intelligence that had made him such a quick learner. Bobby remembered teaching him to sit, to stay, to come when called. Simple commands that had given structure to both their lives when everything else was chaos. Bobby. Morrison hung up the phone. I got conditional approval. If Miss Sullivan can get here with the dog within the next hour and a half, and if the animal passes a basic health screening, you can have 15 minutes. That's all I can do. Bobby felt something break open in his chest. Not quite hope, but something close to it. Thank you. Ma'am, that's more than I ever expected. I'm calling her now. What's the number? Bobby recited Maggie's phone number from memory. The same 7 digits he'd been forbidden to call for 6 years. As Morrison dialed, he found himself praying, really praying, for the first time since his conviction. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Hello. The voice was older than he remembered, but unmistakably Maggie's. Miss Sullivan, this is Warden Morrison at Cumberland Valley State Penitentiary. I'm calling about Robert Mitchell. Silence stretched across the line like a held breath. Ma'am, are you there? Is he? Maggie's voice was barely a whisper. Has something happened? No, ma'am, Mr. Mitchell is scheduled for execution at 9 o'clock this morning, as you know. He's made a final request to see his dog, Thunder. We have very limited time, but if you can get here within the next 90 minutes... Bobby heard something that might have been a sob from the other end of the line. We'll be there, Maggie said, her voice suddenly strong. Thunder and I will be there. The line went dead. Morrison looked at Bobby, who was staring at his hands again. But this time, there was something different in his posture. She's coming, Morrison said unnecessarily. Yes, ma'am. She always was the strongest person I knew. Bobby looked up, and for the first time in years, there was light in his eyes. Warden, I want you to know, whatever happens today, whatever Thunder and I get or don't get, I appreciate this, more than you'll ever know. As the guard prepared to escort him back to his cell, Bobby felt the weight of the chains differently. They were still there, still heavy, but somehow they didn't seem quite as permanent, somewhere 90 miles away. Thunder was about to take a car ride to see his old friend. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough of a miracle for one morning. The clock on the warden's wall read 6:00 a.m. exactly. 3 hours and counting. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The phone's receiver trembled in Margaret Maggie Sullivan's arthritic hands as she set it back in its cradle. Thunder, who had been lying by the kitchen door as he did every morning at 6 o'clock, lifted his massive head and fixed those piercing blue eyes on her face. The German shepherd's ears pricked forward, sensing the change in her demeanor before she'd even moved. "Thunder," she whispered, her voice cracking. "We're going to see Bobby." The dog rose immediately, his tail beginning a cautious wag. At 9 years old, Thunder moved with the careful dignity of age, but his intelligence remained razor-sharp. He padded over to where Maggie stood, gripping the kitchen counter, her 65-year-old frame suddenly feeling every one of its years. For 6 years. Thunder had maintained the same routine. Every evening at exactly 6 o'clock, he would position himself by the front door and wait. His tail would wag hopefully for the first hour, then gradually still as darkness fell. Eventually, he would retreat to Bobby's old flannel shirt, which Maggie kept on the floor beside her bed. The dog would curl up on that faded fabric, inhaling what remained of his master's scent, and sleep fitfully until morning. "Lord, help us," Maggie muttered, reaching for her coat with shaking fingers. Her arthritis was particularly bad this morning. The weather was changing, and her joints always knew before the barometer did. But there wasn't time for pain medication. There wasn't time for anything except getting to that prison. Thunder watched her every movement, his body language shifting from cautious hope to excited anticipation. When she picked up his leash from the hook by the door, he began to pace, a low whine escaping his throat. It was the same sound he'd made every day for 6 years, the sound of longing mixed with confusion. "I know. Boy, I know you don't understand why he hasn't come home." Maggie clipped the leash to Thunder's collar, her fingers fumbling with the metal clasp. "Truth is, I don't understand it either. Bobby Mitchell never hurt a soul in his life, except maybe himself." She grabbed her purse, checking twice for her driver's license and the truck keys. The old Ford pickup had seen better days, but it was reliable. Had to be. Living this far out in farm country. Maggie had bought the place specifically for its isolation after Bobby's arrest, unable to bear the pitying looks and whispered conversations of people who thought they knew the truth. Thunder bounded ahead of her toward the truck, his arthritis momentarily forgotten in his excitement. For the first time in 6 years, the routine was different. For the first time in 6 years, there was somewhere important to go. "Easy, boy," Maggie called, opening the passenger door. Thunder leaped into the cab with surprising agility, immediately positioning himself to stare out the windshield. His entire body vibrated with anticipation, and Maggie felt her heart break a little more. How do you explain death row to a German shepherd? How do you make a dog understand that sometimes good men die for things they didn't do? The truck's engine turned over reluctantly in the morning chill, coughing to life like an old man waking up. Maggie adjusted the rearview mirror and caught sight of her own reflection, silver hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail, worry lines carved deep around her eyes, the face of a woman who had carried too much sorrow for too long. As they pulled out of the gravel driveway, Thunder pressed his nose against the passenger window, his breath fogging the glass. Every few seconds, he would look back at Maggie, as if seeking confirmation that this was really happening. His tail thumped against the worn bench seat in a rhythm of pure hope. The drive to Cumberland Valley State Penitentiary would take 90 minutes if she pushed it, and Maggie intended to push it. She'd driven these back roads for 40 years, first as a young nurse making house calls, then later visiting Bobby when he'd been fighting his demons after Vietnam. She knew every curve, every straightaway where she could safely exceed the speed limit. Thunder had ridden this route before, back when Bobby was first arrested and she'd been allowed to bring the dog to visits. But that had been 6 years ago. And Thunder had been young then, confused but still believing his master would come home any day. Now, as the familiar landscape rolled past the windows, she wondered if he remembered. The German shepherd's behavior suggested he did. His panting increased as they hit the main highway, and he began shifting restlessly in his seat. Occasionally, he would emit a small bark, not distressed, but urgent, as if trying to hurry their progress. "That dog's got more sense than most folks I know," Maggie said aloud, reaching over to stroke Thunder's head. His fur was coarser now than it had been in his youth, and distinctly grayer around his muzzle and ears, but his eyes remained bright and alert, fixed on the road ahead as if he could will their destination closer. The irony wasn't lost on her. For 6 years, she'd watched Thunder wait by that door every evening, never understanding why Bobby didn't come home. Now, finally, they were going to him, and it would be to say goodbye forever. Maggie pressed harder on the accelerator, watching the speedometer climb past the posted limit. A state trooper might stop her, but she'd explain the situation. Most folks understood the bonds between a man and his dog, especially in rural Tennessee. And if they didn't understand, well, she'd pay the ticket and keep driving. The radio crackled with morning talk shows and country music, but Maggie barely heard it. Her mind was focused entirely on the clock on the dashboard and the distance remaining, 85 miles, 1 hour and 20 minutes. Bobby would be sitting in that cell, probably staring at his hands the way he used to when he was thinking too hard about things he couldn't control. Thunder suddenly stood up in the passenger seat, placing his front paws on the dashboard. His tail wagged furiously, and he let out a series of sharp barks. For a moment, Maggie thought he might be car sick, but then she realized what was happening. Somehow, impossibly, Thunder could sense they were getting closer to Bobby. "Easy, boy," she murmured, but her own pulse was quickening. "We're almost there, almost there." The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the Tennessee hills, somewhere ahead, behind concrete walls and razor wire. Bobby Mitchell was counting down his final hours, and somewhere in the cab of an old Ford pickup, a German shepherd named Thunder was finally, after 6 long years of waiting, going home to the man who loved him more than life itself. Maggie glanced at the clock again. 73 miles to go. 1 hour and 15 minutes. Time enough. If they were lucky. Time enough. If mercy still existed in a world that had forgotten how to forgive. Thunder's barking grew more insistent, and Maggie found herself whispering a prayer she hadn't said since she was a child. "Please, Lord, just this once, let us be in time." The memory came to Bobby as clearly as if it were happening again. That first day at the Millfield County Animal Shelter, 6.5 years ago. He'd been drinking too much then, waking up in cold sweats from dreams of rice paddies and helicopter rotors. The kind of dreams that followed a man home from Vietnam and never quite left him alone. Dr. Sarah Coleman, the shelter veterinarian, had been patient with him that October morning. "We have several dogs that might suit you. Mr. Mitchell," she'd said, leading him past kennels full of barking, tail-wagging hopefuls. "But there's one in the back that, well, he's been here almost 6 months. Nobody wants him." The dog cowering in the corner kennel barely looked like a German shepherd. His coat was matted and dull, his ribs showing through patchy fur, but it was his eyes that stopped Bobby cold. Those pale blue eyes held the same haunted look Bobby saw in his own mirror every morning. "What happened to him?" Bobby had asked, crouching down to the kennel's level. "Police found him chained to a tree behind a meth house. Owner got arrested. Left him there for 3 weeks before neighbors called it in. The dog they named Storm when he came in, but he doesn't respond to much of anything. Severe trust issues, obviously. We've been trying to socialize him, but—" Dr. Coleman's voice trailed off. Bobby extended his fingers through the chain link. The dog, Storm, pressed himself further into the corner, trembling. But those blue eyes never left Bobby's face. "Sometimes the good Lord sends exactly what you need, not what you want," Bobby had murmured, repeating something his grandmother used to say. "How much for the adoption fee?" 3 hours later, Storm sat in the passenger seat of Bobby's pickup truck, still trembling but no longer cowering. Bobby had renamed him Thunder during the drive home. Seemed fitting for a dog who'd weathered his own kind of storm. The first weeks had been challenging. Thunder wouldn't eat unless Bobby sat on the floor beside his food bowl. He'd wake up howling from nightmares, just like Bobby did. But gradually, patiently, they'd begun to heal each other. Bobby taught Thunder the basic commands with infinite patience, never raising his voice, never showing frustration when the dog flinched at sudden movements. "Easy, boy," became Bobby's most used phrase. "We've got all the time in the world." Thunder learned quickly once trust began to build. Sit, stay, come, down. Each successful command earned him a treat and gentle praise. But more than that, Bobby could see the dog's confidence growing day by day. His coat began to shine. His ribs disappeared under healthy muscle. And those haunted blue eyes gradually filled with something Bobby had almost forgotten existed. Pure, uncomplicated love. Maggie had been skeptical at first when Bobby introduced her to Thunder. She'd come by his cabin on Sweetwater Creek one evening, bringing homemade soup and concern about his increasing isolation. "Bobby, that dog's becoming your whole world," she'd said, watching Thunder follow Bobby's every movement around the small kitchen. "You need people, too. You need to get out more. Maybe come to church with me on Sundays." "He needs me, Maggie," Bobby had replied, scratching behind Thunder's ears. "First time in my life something needs me that I can actually help." But Maggie had grown to love Thunder almost as much as Bobby did. She'd watch them together during those golden afternoons by the creek, Bobby throwing sticks into the water, Thunder plunging in fearlessly to retrieve them, both of them laughing in their own ways. The dog had given Bobby something to care for beyond his own pain, and Maggie could see the difference it made. Thunder had been a quick learner when it came to swimming. At first, he'd wade in only up to his chest, unsure about the deeper water, but Bobby was patient, wading in himself, encouraging Thunder to follow. "Come on, boy. Trust me. I won't let anything happen to you." The day Thunder finally swam out to the middle of the creek, Bobby had whooped with joy loud enough to startle the herons. When Thunder paddled back to shore, tail wagging furiously, Bobby had knelt in the shallows and hugged him tight. "That's my boy. Knew you had it in you." Those had been the best months of Bobby's life since coming home from Southeast Asia. Simple routines that gave shape to his day's morning coffee on the porch with Thunder at his feet. Afternoon walks through the woods where Thunder would chase squirrels he never quite caught. Evenings by the fireplace where Thunder would rest his big head on Bobby's lap while they both dozed. "We've got a good thing here, don't we, boy?" Bobby would say, and Thunder would thump his tail in agreement. Maggie started joining them for Sunday dinners, bringing Thunder treats and teaching him tricks Bobby hadn't thought to try. She showed Thunder how to shake hands, how to play dead, how to bring Bobby his slippers in the morning. The three of them developed their own rhythm, their own small family unit built on patience and second chances. The proposal had happened by the creek on a warm spring evening. Bobby had been working up the courage for weeks, carrying his grandmother's ring in his pocket like a talisman. Thunder seemed to sense something special was happening. He'd been unusually attentive all day, staying closer to Bobby than usual. "Maggie," Bobby had said, dropping to one knee right there on the creek bank while Thunder watched with what looked like approval. "I know I'm not much of a catch, got more baggage than an airport, but you and Thunder, you've given me a reason to believe in tomorrow again." She'd said yes through tears of joy, and Thunder had celebrated by barking and running circles around them both. They'd planned a simple ceremony for the following fall. Just family and a few close friends. Thunder would be the ring bearer, wearing a special collar Maggie had already picked out. But fall never came. Not the way they'd planned it. The night that changed everything started like any other. Bobby had been reading on the couch. Thunder sprawled across his feet as usual, around 11 o'clock. Thunder's head had suddenly snapped up, ears alert. A low growl rumbled in his chest, not playful, but warning. "What is it, boy?" Bobby had asked, setting down his book. Thunder was on his feet now, hackles raised, staring at the front door. Then came the sound of breaking glass from the back of the house. Thunder erupted into the kind of barking Bobby had never heard from him before, savage, protective, desperate. Bobby grabbed the baseball bat he kept by the door and moved toward the sound, Thunder pressing close to his side, in the kitchen. They found the back door standing open, cold night air streaming in through the splintered frame, and on the floor, in a pool of blood that reflected the overhead light, lay Raymond Kincaid. Thunder had saved Bobby's life that night by waking him up. But it hadn't mattered to the police who arrived 20 minutes later. All they saw was Bobby Mitchell, Vietnam veteran with known PTSD issues, standing over the body of the man who'd cheated him out of his disability settlement 2 years earlier. The knife that killed Kincaid was Bobby's, a hunting knife that had gone missing from his truck 3 weeks prior. His fingerprints were on it, though he couldn't explain how. The motive was clear to everyone except Bobby himself, revenge for the legal fees that had cost him his small savings and nearly his cabin. Thunder had tried to protect Bobby even then, positioning himself between his master and the arresting officers, that same low growl rumbling in his chest. But there was nothing a dog could do against handcuffs and Miranda rights and a justice system that had already made up its mind. "Take care of Thunder," had been Bobby's last words to Maggie as they led him away. "Promise me you'll take care of him." Now, sitting in his cell with 3 hours left to live. Bobby could only pray that Thunder remembered him the way he remembered Thunder, with love uncomplicated by judgment or doubt. The Cumberland Valley State Penitentiary loomed ahead like a concrete monument to human failure, its guard towers and razor wire cutting harsh silhouettes against the morning sky. Maggie gripped the steering wheel tighter as she approached the main gate, Thunder whimpering softly beside her as if he could sense the weight of the place. "Easy, boy," she murmured, though her own heart was hammering against her ribs. "We're here for Bobby. Just stay calm." The guard at the checkpoint looked skeptical as Maggie explained her purpose, his weathered face creasing into a frown. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to call this in. We don't normally allow animals on the premises." "I understand," Maggie replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Warden Morrison is expecting us. Robert Mitchell's final request." Thunder pressed his nose against the window, his breath fogging the glass as he watched the uniformed officer make his phone call. The dog's body was tense, alert, as if every instinct was telling him this place meant danger for his pack. 20 minutes later, they were escorted through a series of security checkpoints that made Maggie's skin crawl. The metallic clanking of doors, the echo of footsteps on concrete, the pervasive smell of disinfectant and despair. All of it felt designed to strip away humanity. Thunder stayed close to her side, his training kicking in despite the stressful environment, but she could see the whites of his eyes showing, the way his ears swiveled at every new sound. This was no place for a dog who'd spent his life in open fields and creek beds. Meanwhile, 90 miles away in a cluttered office overlooking downtown Nashville, Detective William Bill Thompson sat surrounded by case files that should have been closed years ago. At 59, he was 3 months from retirement, looking forward to fishing and forgetting about the cases that kept him awake at night. But Bobby Mitchell's file lay open on his desk, and something about it had been eating at him for months. Thompson had built his career on instinct, and his instinct told him something was wrong with the Mitchell conviction. The evidence had been almost too neat, too convenient. A Vietnam vet with PTSD, a clear motive, physical evidence that pointed directly to him. It was the kind of case that wrapped up quickly and looked good in the newspapers. But Thompson remembered the look in Bobby Mitchell's eyes during questioning. He'd interviewed hundreds of killers over his 35-year career, and they all had something in common: a disconnect, a coldness, even when they claimed innocence. Bobby Mitchell had looked genuinely bewildered, like a man who'd awakened from a nightmare to find it was real. "I've been around long enough to know when something stinks," Thompson muttered to himself, pulling out a thick folder marked Witness Statements, Kincaid Murder. He'd reviewed these statements dozens of times over the years, but something had always bothered him about the timeline. 3 witnesses had placed Bobby's truck near Kincaid's house around 10:30 p.m., but the coroner had estimated time of death between 11:15 and 11:45 p.m. That left over an hour unaccounted for. Thompson reached for his phone and dialed a number he'd memorized years ago. Dr. Elizabeth Carter had been the responding veterinarian when police found an injured dog at the scene. Thunder, trying to protect his unconscious master from the paramedics. She'd treated the dog's minor cuts and given him a sedative before releasing him to Maggie Sullivan. "Dr. Carter, this is Detective Thompson with Metro Police. I know this is going to sound strange, but I need to ask you about the Mitchell case from 6 years ago." There was a long pause on the other end of the line when Dr. Carter spoke, Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I was wondering when someone would finally call." Thompson's pulse quickened. "Ma'am, I've been carrying this for 6 years. Detective, I saw what really happened that night, and it wasn't Robert Mitchell who killed Raymond Kincaid." The phone nearly slipped from Thompson's hand. "Dr. Carter, I need you to tell me everything. Right now." "I was driving home from an emergency call around 11:20 that night. My route took me past Kincaid's place, and I saw a man leaving through the back door. Tall, thin, wearing dark clothes. He got into a black sedan parked on the side road, not Bobby Mitchell's truck. Why didn't you come forward during the trial?" Dr. Carter's voice cracked. "Because 2 days after I gave my initial statement to Officer Harris, I got a phone call. A man's voice, very calm, very polite. He knew where my daughter went to school. Detective. He knew what time my husband left for work every morning. He said if I testified, if I said anything about what I really saw, my family would pay the price." Thompson was scribbling notes furiously. "Do you still have that statement, the one you gave to Harris?" "That's just it. There's no record of it. I called the station a week later to follow up, and they said they had no statement from me. Officer Harris claimed we never spoke. It was like it never happened." A chill ran down Thompson's spine. Harris had been one of the first responders, one of the officers who'd found Bobby Mitchell at the scene. If he'd buried witness testimony that contradicted the case against Mitchell. "Dr. Carter, would you be willing to give a new statement? Today." "Detective, that man is scheduled to die this morning. Isn't he? I've been watching the news, trying to work up the courage to call someone. I can't let an innocent man die because I was too scared to speak up." Thompson glanced at the clock on his wall, 7:15 a.m., less than 2 hours. "I'm on my way to you right now. And Dr. Carter, thank you for finally making this call." As Thompson grabbed his keys and badge, his mind was racing. If Dr. Carter was telling the truth, if there had been another man at the scene, then the entire case against Bobby Mitchell was built on a lie. But who was the real killer? And more importantly, who had the power to bury witness testimony and frame an innocent man? He thought about the description Dr. Carter had given. Tall, thin man in dark clothes, driving a black sedan. Thompson pulled out another file from his desk, one marked Unsolved, Walter Green. Green was a known assassin who'd been linked to several contract killings in the region but had never been caught. The description matched, and Green was exactly the type who'd be hired to eliminate someone like Raymond Kincaid. Kincaid had been more than just a shady businessman. He'd been connected to some powerful people with expensive secrets. If Kincaid had been planning to talk, to make a deal with prosecutors to save his own skin, those people would have had strong motivation to silence him permanently. Thompson's phone rang as he reached his car. "Thompson? Detective, this is Warden Morrison at Cumberland Valley. I know this is highly irregular, but I have a man here scheduled to die in less than 2 hours, and I'm getting a very bad feeling about his case. His final request was to see his dog, and watching them together. I've been doing this job for 23 years, and I know guilt when I see it. This man isn't guilty of murder. Warden, I'm driving to interview a witness who may have seen the real killer. Can you delay the execution?" "Not without new evidence. Detective, the governor won't grant a stay based on feelings and hunches. I need something concrete." Thompson started his engine. already mentally calculating the drive time to Dr. Carter's clinic. "Give me 2 hours, Warden." 2 hours, and I'll give you something concrete? Detective, I can give you maybe 90 minutes before the process becomes irreversible. After that, it won't matter what evidence you find. As Thompson raced through the Nashville streets, his radio crackled with routine police business, domestic disputes, traffic accidents, the mundane crimes that filled most days. But today was different. Today, an innocent man was counting down his final minutes while the real killer walked free. Thunder's barking echoed through the prison corridors as guards led Maggie toward the visiting area. The dog seemed to know they were getting closer to Bobby, his excitement becoming almost uncontrollable. For 6 years, Thunder had waited by doors that never opened to reveal his master. Today, finally, one would... The steel door swung open with a metallic clang that echoed through the visiting room like a gunshot. Thunder's massive body went rigid, every muscle coiled with anticipation as his ice-blue eyes scanned the sterile space. Then he saw him. Bobby Mitchell sat hunched on a plastic chair, hands shackled at his waist, orange jumpsuit hanging loose on his diminished frame. But the moment Thunder's eyes found his master's face, the German shepherd exploded into motion that no amount of training could contain. "Thunder!" Bobby's voice cracked like a teenager's as the dog bounded across the room, leash trailing behind him. The animal launched himself at Bobby with such force that it nearly knocked both man and chair backward, powerful paws scrambling to find purchase on Bobby's chest and shoulders. "Easy, boy, easy!" Bobby laughed, through tears that had been 6 years in the making, his shackled hands somehow finding their way to Thunder's graying muzzle. "Lord Almighty, look at you. Look how big you've gotten." Thunder whined and whimpered, a sound of pure joy mixed with confusion and desperate relief. His tail whipped back and forth with such violence it was knocking over empty chairs behind him. The dog pressed his nose against Bobby's neck, inhaling deeply, confirming what his eyes and heart already knew. This was his person, his pack leader, his whole world finally returned. "I know, boy, I know," Bobby whispered into Thunder's fur, which was indeed grayer now, silver threads running through the black and tan coat like winter frost. "I'm sorry I've been gone so long. I'm so sorry." Maggie stood frozen in the doorway, her hand pressed to her mouth as she watched the reunion she'd prayed for, but never quite believed would happen. The love between man and dog was so pure, so immediate and uncomplicated, that it made everything else in the room, the concrete walls, the armed guards, the approaching execution, seem surreal and temporary. Guard Stevens, a 20-year veteran who'd seen everything the prison system had to offer, found himself blinking back moisture from his own eyes. 15 minutes, he said quietly, his usual gruff authority softened by what he was witnessing. "That's all the time we can give you." Thunder seemed to understand that time was precious. Instead of his usual exuberant circling and jumping, he pressed himself against Bobby's legs and stayed there, his big head resting on his master's lap. Occasionally he would look up to study Bobby's face, as if memorizing every line and wrinkle that hadn't been there 6 years ago. "He's been waiting for you every single day," Maggie finally managed to say, stepping into the room. "Every evening at 6 o'clock. He goes to the door and waits. Some nights I'd find him sleeping right there on the doormat, like he thought you might come home while he was asleep and he didn't want to miss you. Bobby's hands, limited by the shackles, could only reach Thunder's head and ears, but he made the most of it, scratching behind the spots that had always made Thunder's leg kick in contentment. "You've taken good care of him, Maggie. Look at him. He's healthy, well-fed. That's more than I had any right to expect." "Bobby." Maggie's voice was thick with 6 years of unspoken words. "I never believed it. Not for 1 second. I know you didn't kill Raymond Kincaid." Before Bobby could respond, Thunder suddenly lifted his head, ears pricked forward in alert attention. The dog was staring at the corridor beyond the visiting room, a low growl rumbling in his chest. It wasn't the playful sound he made when wrestling with a rope toy. This was the growl of a dog sensing danger to his pack. "What is it, boy?" Bobby asked, following Thunder's gaze. In the hallway outside, Detective Thompson was speaking urgently with Warden Morrison, his voice carrying just enough for them to catch fragments. "Witness statement. Cover up. Walter Green." Thunder's growl intensified, and he positioned himself between Bobby and the doorway, hackles rising along his spine. The dog's instincts, honed by years of protecting his master, were telling him that strangers meant trouble for Bobby. "It's okay, Thunder," Bobby soothed, though his own pulse had quickened at the sound of his case being discussed. "They're the good guys." But Thunder wasn't convinced. He'd learned 6 years ago that uniformed men took his master away, and every fiber of his being was now focused on preventing that from happening again. When Detective Thompson appeared in the doorway, Thunder's lips pulled back to reveal impressive canine teeth. "Easy there, big fella," Thompson said, recognizing a protective dog when he saw one. He'd been around enough K9 units to know that Thunder could do serious damage if he decided Thompson was a threat to Bobby. "Thunder, sit," Bobby commanded, and the dog immediately obeyed, though his body remained tense and ready to spring into action. "Good boy. Stay." Thompson looked at Bobby with eyes that held something Bobby hadn't seen in 6 years, doubt about his guilt. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm Detective Thompson. I was one of the investigators on your case, and I need to ask you some questions. Detective, with all due respect, I've got maybe 10 minutes left with my dog before—" Bobby's voice faltered. "Sir, that's exactly what I'm here about. Dr. Elizabeth Carter has just given me a statement that could change everything. She witnessed the real killer leaving Raymond Kincaid's house the night he died." The words hit Bobby like a physical blow. Thunder immediately sensed his master's distress and pressed closer, offering the only comfort he could. Maggie sank into a nearby chair, her face pale. "Dr. Carter," Bobby repeated. "The vet who treated Thunder that night. She saw a man leaving Kincaid's back door around 11:20 p.m., tall, thin, driving a black sedan. Not your truck, Mr. Mitchell." She tried to give a statement to Officer Harris, but it disappeared from the record. She was threatened into silence. Bobby's world tilted on its axis. For 6 years, he'd maintained his innocence while the evidence mounted against him. For 6 years. He'd wondered if maybe the PTSD and drinking had caused him to black out, to do something unthinkable and forget it. But now, "You're saying someone else killed Kincaid and framed me for it." "That's exactly what I'm saying. We think it was Walter Green, a contract killer who's been on our radar for years. Someone with money and power wanted Kincaid dead, and they needed a convenient scapegoat. Thunder whined softly. Sensing the emotional turmoil radiating from Bobby, the dog nudged his master's hand, a gesture he'd learned over the years that usually brought comfort. "Some secrets eat you alive from the inside out," Maggie whispered, echoing something her grandmother used to say. "Dr. Carter must have been dying inside all these years." Warden Morrison appeared in the doorway, her face grim. "Mr. Mitchell, I've just gotten off the phone with the governor's office. Based on Detective Thompson's preliminary findings, they're willing to grant a temporary stay of execution, 24 hours, while this new evidence is investigated." The words took a moment to penetrate Bobby's consciousness. When they did, he looked down at Thunder, who was watching his face with those intelligent blue eyes. "You hear that? Boy, we might have more time together." Thunder's tail began to wag, tentatively at first, then with growing enthusiasm. Dogs might not understand the complexities of legal proceedings, but they understood hope when they felt it radiating from their beloved humans. "There's more," Thompson continued. "We've located Walter Green in Mexico. If we can extradite him and get him to talk, we might be able to uncover the whole conspiracy. But Mr. Mitchell, I need you to tell me everything you remember about that night. Every detail, no matter how small." Bobby looked at Thunder, then at Maggie, then back at the detective who might hold the key to his freedom. After 6 years of counting down to death, suddenly time had taken on a different meaning entirely. "Detective," Bobby said, his voice stronger than it had been in years, "I'll tell you everything I know." The next hour unfolded like scenes from a fever dream, each moment bleeding into the next with jarring intensity. In the prison visiting room, Bobby recounted that terrible night while Thunder remained pressed against his legs, the dog's warmth grounding him to the present, even as his mind traveled back to the darkness. "Thunder woke me up around 11:15, Bobby said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. He was barking like I'd never heard before, not his usual alert bark, but something desperate. By the time I got to the kitchen, the back door was already open and Kincaid was on the floor." Detective Thompson scribbled notes furiously. "Did you see anyone else?" "Hear a car driving away." Thunder was going crazy, circling the body, then running to the door like he was trying to tell me something. I was so focused on whether Kincaid was still alive, on calling for help. Bobby shook his head. "I should have listened to Thunder. Dogs know things we don't." Meanwhile, 40 miles away at the Millfield Veterinary Clinic, Dr. Elizabeth Carter sat across from Detective Williams, Thompson's partner, who'd driven out to take her formal statement. Her hand shook as she signed the document that could save an innocent man's life. "I've relived that night 1,000 times," she told Williams, her voice barely above a whisper. "I keep thinking, if I'd been braver, if I'd fought harder to make someone listen, Robert Mitchell wouldn't have spent 6 years on death row." Back at the prison, Warden Morrison fielded phone calls from the governor's office, the attorney general, and reporters who'd somehow gotten wind of the developing story. The execution chamber, which had been prepared and waiting, now sat empty, a sterile monument to a justice system that had nearly claimed an innocent life. Thunder seemed to sense the shift in energy around him. The dog's behavior had changed from desperate reunion joy to something more complex, a protective vigilance mixed with growing hope. He positioned himself so he could see both Bobby and the doorway, his ears swiveling at every sound from the corridor. "That dog would follow you to hell and back," Maggie observed, watching Thunder's unwavering attention to Bobby's every movement. "He already has," Bobby replied, scratching behind Thunder's ears in the spot that always made the dog lean into his touch. 6 years of waiting for someone who might never come home. That's its own kind of hell. In Nashville, Detective Thompson's phone rang with news that sent electricity through his veins. "Thompson here. Detective, this is Agent Martinez with DEA. You put out a bolo on Walter Green. We've had him under surveillance in Cabo San Lucas for 3 months. Money laundering investigation. When we saw your alert, we picked him up. He's being extradited as we speak." Thompson nearly dropped the phone. "How soon can you have him back in Tennessee?" "He's already in the air. Private jet courtesy of some very motivated federal prosecutors. Should be landing at Nashville International within 2 hours. The detective immediately called the prison. "Warden Morrison, we've got Green in custody. I need more time with Mitchell. He might remember details that could help us break Green's story." But time was fragmenting into a dozen urgent storylines, each demanding immediate attention. In the prison's administrative wing, Assistant District Attorney Charles Patterson was reviewing Dr. Carter's statement with growing alarm. The implications weren't just about one wrongful conviction. They suggested a conspiracy involving multiple law enforcement officials. "If Harris buried witness testimony," Patterson muttered to his assistant, "how many other cases might be compromised?" The news had reached the protesters outside the prison gates, creating a surreal scene where death penalty opponents and supporters found themselves united in demanding justice for Bobby Mitchell. Signs that had read, "Stop the execution," now read, "Free Bobby Mitchell," while others proclaimed, "Find the real killer." Inside the visiting room, Bobby was remembering details he'd forgotten, triggered by Thunder's presence and the possibility that someone might finally believe him. "There was something else," he said suddenly. "Thunder kept running to the window after the police arrived. He'd bark, then run back to me, then back to the window, like he was trying to show me something." "Which window?" Thompson asked. "Kitchen window, facing the backwoods. There's a deer trail that runs from there down to the creek. Someone could have used it to get to a car parked on the old logging road." Thunder's head lifted at the mention of the creek, his tail giving a tentative wag. The woods and water were some of his happiest memories with Bobby, long walks where they'd flush rabbits and wade through shallow pools, both of them free and content. Maggie found herself remembering those walks too, how Thunder would bound ahead and circle back to make sure Bobby was following, how the dog had brought such joy and purpose to Bobby's battle with his wartime demons. "Bobby was a different man with Thunder," she told Thompson during a brief moment when Bobby was speaking privately with the chaplain. "That dog saved his life in ways you can't imagine. He gave Bobby something to live for when the nightmares got too bad." The detective nodded, understanding more than Maggie realized. He'd seen plenty of veterans struggle with invisible wounds, and he'd seen how animal companionship could bridge the gap between despair and hope. At 1:30 p.m., Walter Green's plane touched down in Nashville. The man who emerged in federal custody was exactly as Dr. Carter had described, tall, thin, with the predatory stillness of someone accustomed to violence. But Green's lawyer was already demanding deals, hinting that his client had information about corruption that reached far beyond one murder. "My client was hired to eliminate Raymond Kincaid," the lawyer told federal prosecutors, "but the frame-up of Robert Mitchell wasn't his idea. That came from people with badges and political connections." back at the prison. Thunder had been allowed to stay far beyond the original 15-minute limit. The dog seemed to understand that something fundamental had changed. Instead of the desperate, clinging energy of goodbye, there was now the possibility of tomorrow. Bobby found himself making plans for the first time in 6 years. "If I get out of here, Thunder, we're going to take the longest walk of our lives. Down to the creek, through the woods, maybe all the way to Miller's Pond." Thunder's tail wagged harder at the familiar words. Miller's Pond had been their special place, where Bobby would skip stones while Thunder chased minnows in the shallows, both of them healing from different kinds of trauma. As afternoon shadows began to lengthen across the prison yard, Warden Morrison received the call she'd been waiting for. "Walter Green has confessed to the murder of Raymond Kincaid," the voice from the Attorney General's office informed her. "He's also implicated 2 police officers and a county commissioner in the conspiracy to frame Robert Mitchell. The governor is prepared to commute Mr. Mitchell's sentence immediately and begin the process for a full pardon." Morrison found Bobby in the visiting room, still surrounded by Thunder, Maggie, and Detective Thompson. The warden's usually stern expression had softened into something approaching relief. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, "I have news." Thunder looked up at the warden with those intelligent blue eyes, and for a moment Morrison could swear the dog understood that everything was about to change. His tail began to wag with renewed vigor, as if he could sense that the long wait was finally, mercifully, coming to an end. "Sometimes the good Lord saves the best for last," Bobby whispered to Thunder, echoing words his grandmother had taught him decades ago, for the first time in 6 years. Those words felt like more than just hope. They felt like truth. The words hit Bobby like a physical blow, but this time it was hope that knocked the wind from his lungs rather than despair. "News," he managed to whisper, his voice barely audible over the thundering of his own heartbeat. Warden Morrison stepped fully into the visiting room, her usually rigid posture softened by what she carried in her hands, official documents that would change everything. "Walter Green has confessed to the murder of Raymond Kincaid. He's also implicated several law enforcement officials in framing you. The governor has commuted your death sentence, effective immediately." The silence that followed was deafening. Thunder, sensing the monumental shift in energy, whined softly and pressed closer to Bobby, his massive head resting on his master's lap. Maggie's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. But even as relief flooded through the room, a new terror was taking hold. Thunder had begun to pant heavily, his breathing becoming labored and irregular. The stress of the day, the emotional reunion, the overwhelming stimulation of the prison environment, it was all taking its toll on the 9-year-old German shepherd's heart. "Something's wrong," Bobby said urgently, his shackled hands moving to Thunder's chest. He could feel the dog's heartbeat racing beneath his palm, irregular and frantic. "Thunder, Thunder, talk to me, boy!" The dog tried to lift his head but couldn't manage it. His ice-blue eyes, usually so bright and alert, were becoming glazed and distant. A thin line of drool began to escape from the corner of his mouth. "We need a vet," Maggie cried, dropping to her knees beside the chair. "He's having some kind of attack," Dr. Carter, who had been waiting in the administrative wing to provide additional testimony if needed, was summoned immediately. She arrived with her emergency bag, her face grave as she knelt beside the distressed animal. "His heart is racing," she confirmed after a quick examination. "The stress has triggered what looks like cardiac arrhythmia. At his age, with the emotional trauma of today. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Bobby felt his world tilting again, but this time for entirely different reasons. After 6 years of separation, after finally being proven innocent, he might lose Thunder anyway. The irony was cruel beyond measure. Is he? Bobby couldn't form the words. He needs immediate medical attention, Dr. Carter said, preparing a syringe. This will help stabilize his heart rate, but he needs to get to my clinic for a full cardiac workup. Thunder's eyes found Bobby's face, and in them was a look the man had never seen before. Fear, not the wariness of an abused animal or the alertness of a protective guardian, but the deep, primal fear of a creature who sensed his own mortality. "Hey, boy," Bobby whispered, leaning down until his forehead nearly touched Thunder's. "Remember what I always told you. We've got all the time in the world. We're going to have all the time in the world." But even as he spoke the words, Bobby could feel Thunder's body growing heavier against his legs, the dog's breathing becoming more shallow. The reunion that should have been purely joyful was becoming a race against time of a different sort. Warden Morrison made a decision that went against every protocol in the book. Get a transport ready. Mitchell goes with the dog to the veterinary clinic, full escort, but he stays with his animal. "Ma'am, the regulations clearly state," Guard Stevens began. "The regulations didn't account for this situation." Morrison cut him off. "This man has been proven innocent after 6 years on death row. His dog is dying from stress caused by our system's failure. We're going to do whatever it takes to make this right." 20 minutes later, Bobby found himself in the back of an ambulance, his shackles removed for the first time in 6 years, cradling Thunder's head in his lap as they raced toward Dr. Carter's clinic. The dog's breathing had stabilized somewhat with the medication, but he remained listless and unresponsive. "Stay with me, Thunder," Bobby murmured continuously. "Don't you give up on me now, not when we're so close to going home." Maggie rode in the front seat, her own heart condition flaring under the stress. She'd taken 2 nitroglycerin tablets in the past hour, but nothing could slow the panic coursing through her system. The thought of losing Thunder now, after everything they'd been through, was almost unbearable. At the veterinary clinic, Dr. Carter worked with grim efficiency, hooking Thunder up to monitors that showed the irregular dance of his failing heart. The EKG readings painted a stark picture. Years of stress and separation had taken their toll on the loyal animal's cardiovascular system. "He's been carrying trauma in his body for 6 years, Dr. Carter explained as she administered another injection. "Dogs don't understand time the way we do." To Thunder, every day you were gone felt like abandonment happening over and over again. Bobby watched the monitors, reading Thunder's vital signs the way he'd once read enemy positions in the Vietnamese jungle, looking for any sign of hope, any indication that survival was possible. The steady beep of the heart monitor was both reassuring and terrifying, each sound a reminder that Thunder's life hung in the balance. Detective Thompson arrived at the clinic with updates that should have been cause for celebration. Walter Green had provided a detailed confession that implicated not just the officers who'd buried evidence, but a network of corruption that reached into the highest levels of county government. Bobby's exoneration was complete and absolute. "They're preparing to release you tonight," Thompson told Bobby, who barely looked up from Thunder's still form. "Full pardon. Compensation for wrongful imprisonment. The works. Don't matter none if Thunder doesn't make it," Bobby replied, his voice hollow. "6 years I've been dreaming of going home with him. Can't imagine going home without him." As if responding to his master's voice, Thunder's eyes fluttered open. The dog's gaze immediately found Bobby's face, and for a moment some of the old intelligence flickered back into those pale blue depths. "That's my boy," Bobby whispered, gently stroking Thunder's graying muzzle. "You fight. You hear me. We've got walks to take, creeks to explore. You've got to get better so we can go home together." Thunder's tail managed a weak wag, thumping once against the examination table. It was the smallest of movements, but it carried the weight of 6 years of unwavering loyalty and love. "Doctor." Carter studied the monitors with cautious optimism. "His heart rate is stabilizing. The arrhythmia is responding to treatment. He's not out of the woods yet, but—" She paused, watching Thunder's obvious response to Bobby's presence. "Sometimes the best medicine isn't something we can prescribe." Outside the clinic, news vans were beginning to gather as word spread about Bobby's exoneration and Thunder's critical condition. The story of the loyal dog and the wrongfully convicted man had captured public attention in a way that transcended typical crime reporting. But inside the treatment room, none of that mattered. There was only Bobby and Thunder, man and dog, reconnecting after 6 years of forced separation while fighting against time and biology for the chance to build new memories together. "That dog would follow you to hell and back," Maggie had said earlier, and Bobby was beginning to understand the literal truth of those words. Thunder had waited 6 years, carrying the stress and confusion of his master's absence in his very bones. Now, finally reunited, he was fighting for his life with the same stubborn loyalty that had sustained him through the long, lonely years of waiting. As the sun set outside the clinic windows, casting long shadows across the treatment room, Bobby made a promise to the unconscious dog in his arms. "You get through this, Thunder, and I swear we'll never be apart again. Not for one day, not for 1 hour. We're a pack. You and me, we stick together from here on out." Thunder's breathing deepened slightly, as if even in his sedated state he could hear and understand every word. 3 hours later, as the autumn sun painted the clinic walls in shades of amber and gold, Thunder's eyes opened with a clarity that hadn't been there since his collapse. The monitors showed a steady, strong heartbeat, and when Bobby called his name softly, the German shepherd's tail gave a tentative but determined wag. "Welcome back, boy," Bobby whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Thought I was going to lose you there for a while." Dr. Carter approached the examination table with a smile that transformed her worried features. "His vitals are stable. The medication has corrected the arrhythmia, and his blood pressure is back to normal ranges. I think the worst is over." But as Bobby reached to stroke Thunder's head, the treatment room door burst open with shocking violence. Judge Harrison Montgomery stood in the doorway, his face twisted with an expression Bobby had never seen during any court proceeding. Raw, desperate fear. Desperate. "You should have died quietly, Mitchell," the 69-year-old judge said, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "Green wasn't supposed to talk. None of this was supposed to come out." Detective Thompson, who had been making phone calls in the clinic's waiting area, appeared behind the judge with his weapon drawn. Judge Montgomery, step away from Mitchell and the dog. Now. The revelation hit Bobby like ice water. Judge Montgomery, the man who had sentenced him to death, who had denied every appeal, who had looked him in the eye and spoken of justice and the rule of law, had been part of the conspiracy all along. "You," Bobby managed to say, his voice barely a whisper. "You were involved in framing me." "Raymond Kincaid was going to destroy everything," Montgomery said, his distinguished facade cracking completely. 20 years of development deals, millions in county contracts, careers built on mutual understanding. He got greedy, started threatening to expose our arrangements unless we cut him a bigger piece. Thunder, responding to the threat in the judge's voice and posture, struggled to raise his head. Despite his weakened condition, the dog's protective instincts kicked in. A low growl rumbled from his throat as he tried to position himself between Bobby and the man who represented danger. "So, you had him killed," Detective Thompson said, keeping his weapon trained on Montgomery while slowly moving closer. "And when Walter Green botched the job by leaving evidence behind, you needed a scapegoat." "Mitchell was perfect," Montgomery continued, his voice taking on the measured tone he'd used from the bench for decades. "Vietnam veteran with PTSD, financial motive, already suspected of having violent episodes. We just had to plant the right evidence and make sure the investigation didn't look too hard at alternatives." So, Maggie, who had been sitting quietly beside Thunder's examination table, found her voice. "Officer Harris," she said suddenly. "He was the one who buried Dr. Carter's witness statement. He was working for you." Montgomery's laugh was bitter and hollow. "Harris, Patterson, half the sheriff's department. We had people everywhere. The conviction was supposed to be the end of it. Mitchell dies quietly in prison. The heat dies down. Everyone moves on with their lives. Except Bobby was innocent," Dr. Carter said from where she stood near the medical equipment. "And you were willing to execute an innocent man to protect your corruption." The judge's face hardened. Innocent Mitchell was a broken-down drunk with blood on his hands from Vietnam. What difference did it make if he died for Kincaid's murder or lived to drink himself to death in some trailer park? At least this way, his death served a purpose. Thunder's growl intensified, and somehow the weakened dog managed to get his front paws under him, raising his head and chest off the examination table. His ice-blue eyes were fixed on Montgomery with the same intensity Bobby remembered from that night 6 years ago when Thunder had tried to warn him about the real danger. "Easy, Thunder," Bobby said softly, placing a gentle hand on the dog's back. "I know, boy, I know he's the bad guy. You always could sense these things better than I could." Detective Thompson was speaking into his radio, calling for backup. But Montgomery seemed beyond caring about arrest or consequences. The weight of years of guilt and fear had finally broken something fundamental in the man who had dispensed justice from behind a judicial bench. "You want to know the real irony? Mitchell," Montgomery said, his voice taking on a manic edge. "Green was supposed to make it look like a robbery gone wrong, simple, clean, no connection to any of us. But your damn dog started barking and woke up half the neighborhood before Green could finish staging the scene." Bobby felt a chill run down his spine as the pieces fell into place. "Thunder saved my life that night, didn't he? If he hadn't woken me up, Green would have killed us both and made it look like I was the intruder. The plan was for you to die alongside Kincaid," Montgomery confirmed, 2 problems solved with 1 solution, but Green panicked when the dog kept barking, grabbed the wrong knife from your truck, and ran, left us with a mess we had to clean up improvisation. Thunder had managed to get into a sitting position on the examination table, his body trembling with effort, but his gaze never wavering from Montgomery's face. The dog might not understand the complex web of corruption and conspiracy, but he understood loyalty and betrayal with crystal clarity. Dr. Carter moved closer to Thunder, ostensibly to check his vitals, but actually positioning herself protectively near Bobby. "That's why you buried my witness statement," she said to Montgomery. "I saw Green leaving the scene, saw the real killer. That would have ruined everything. Harris should have made sure you kept your mouth shut permanently," Montgomery replied coldly. But he was always too soft for the hard decisions. The sound of sirens was growing closer, but Montgomery seemed lost in his confession, as if the weight of 6 years of deception was finally demanding release. "Every appeal you filed, Mitchell, every motion for new evidence, I made sure they were denied. I sat in that courtroom and looked you in the eye while condemning you to death, knowing you were innocent, and I slept fine every night doing it." Bobby stared at the man who had held his life in his hands for 6 years, feeling a mixture of rage and profound sadness. "How many others?" he asked quietly. "How many other innocent people did you railroad to protect your little empire?" Montgomery's silence was answer enough. Thunder suddenly lurched forward, using the last of his strength to place himself fully between Bobby and the corrupt judge. The German shepherd's legs were shaking with exhaustion, but his loyalty burned brighter than his physical limitations. "That's enough," Detective Thompson said firmly as backup officers appeared in the doorway. "Judge Harrison Montgomery, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and violation of civil rights under color of law." As the handcuffs clicked around Montgomery's wrists, he looked one last time at Bobby and Thunder. "You should have just died quietly," he repeated. But this time, his voice carried the defeat of a man who knew his world was crumbling. Thunder finally collapsed back onto the examination table, his energy spent, but his mission accomplished. He had protected his master one final time, standing guard even in his weakened state against the man who had tried to destroy them both. Bobby gathered the exhausted dog into his arms, feeling Thunder's rapid heartbeat gradually slow to a more normal rhythm. "Good boy," he whispered. "Such a good boy. You knew all along, didn't you? You always knew who the real enemy was." As Montgomery was led away in handcuffs, Bobby realized that his exoneration was now complete in ways he had never imagined. Not only was he innocent of murder, but the very system that had condemned him was revealed to be corrupt to its core. Thunder's tail managed one weak wag against Bobby's chest, and for the first time in 6 years, both man and dog could finally rest easy, knowing the truth had finally set them free. 3 months later, the October sun cast dancing shadows through the golden leaves as Bobby Mitchell walked slowly along the familiar path beside Sweetwater Creek. Thunder padded beside him, moving with the careful dignity of a dog who had learned to pace himself but refused to be left behind. The German shepherd's muzzle was grayer now, and Dr. Carter had prescribed daily heart medication, but his eyes still held that bright intelligence that had sustained Bobby through the darkest years of his life. "Look at that boy," Bobby said, pointing to a great blue heron standing motionless in the shallows. "Remember how you used to try to catch those when you were young? Never did figure out they could fly, did you?" Thunder's tail wagged in response. though he made no move to chase the bird. At 9.5 years old, he'd learned to appreciate the beauty of the creek without feeling the need to disturb its peace. The two of them had developed a new rhythm over the past months: shorter walks, longer rests, and an appreciation for simple moments that might once have been taken for granted. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media interviews, and adjustments to freedom that Bobby had never anticipated. The state's settlement for wrongful imprisonment had been substantial enough to buy back his old cabin and ensure comfortable retirement for both him and Thunder. More importantly, it had funded the legal defense for 3 other inmates whose cases showed similar patterns of corruption involving Judge Montgomery's network. "Bobby," Maggie's voice called from the meadow behind them. "You two better head back. Dr. Carter will be here in an hour for Thunder's checkup." They had married 2 weeks ago in a simple ceremony beside this very creek, with Thunder serving as ring-bearer despite Dr. Carter's concerns about the excitement affecting his heart. The German shepherd had carried the rings in a special pouch attached to his collar, his tail wagging proudly as he walked down the makeshift aisle between folding chairs filled with friends, reporters, and fellow exonerees who had become like family. "Come on, Thunder," Bobby said, turning back toward the cabin. "Let's go see what Maggie's cooking for lunch." The dog followed willingly, pausing occasionally to sniff at familiar scents along the path. This was their territory now. Acres of fenced meadow where Thunder could roam freely, the creek where he could wade when his arthritis allowed, and the cabin where he slept each night on an orthopedic bed positioned perfectly to keep watch over both Bobby and Maggie. As they approached the house, Bobby could see Detective Thompson's unmarked car parked in the driveway. Thompson had become a regular visitor, updating them on the ongoing prosecutions while also seeming to find peace in their simple, honest life. The detective was set to retire next month, and Bobby suspected he needed the reminder that justice could sometimes prevail, even when it took longer than anyone hoped. "Afternoon, Bobby?" Thompson called from the porch where he sat with Maggie, a glass of sweet tea in his hand. "How's our boy doing today?" Thunder approached the detective with cautious friendliness, allowing Thompson to scratch behind his ears while maintaining the reserved dignity of a dog who had learned to trust slowly. The past months had taught Thunder that not all strangers meant harm, but he remained selectively social, reserving his deepest affection for the small circle of humans who had proven their loyalty. "He's slowing down some," Bobby admitted, settling into the rocking chair Maggie had positioned specifically for afternoon conversations. "But Doc Carter says his heart's doing well on the medication. We're taking it one day at a time." Thompson nodded, understanding more than the medical implications. The detective had watched dozens of wrongfully convicted men struggle to adapt to freedom, and he knew that healing came in small increments, marked by moments of simple contentment rather than dramatic revelations. "Got some news from the courthouse," Thompson said. "Montgomery's plea hearing is scheduled for next week. His lawyers are pushing for 25 to life instead of the death penalty. Apparently, he's been cooperating with federal investigators about the corruption network." Bobby was quiet for a moment, watching Thunder settle carefully onto his favorite spot on the porch, a sunny patch where he could monitor the driveway while staying close to his family. "You know, Bill, I spent 6 years hating that man, lying awake nights thinking about what I'd say to him if I ever got the chance. And now," Maggie asked gently. "Now I mostly feel sorry for him," Bobby replied, surprising himself with the honesty of it. "Imagine living with that kind of guilt, knowing you've destroyed innocent lives to protect your own interests. That's its own kind of prison." Thunder lifted his head at the sound of a vehicle approaching, a white van with Dr. Carter's veterinary practice logo on the side. The dog's tail wagged with moderate enthusiasm. He'd grown fond of the woman who had finally found the courage to speak the truth, even though he still associated her visits with medical procedures he'd rather avoid. Dr. Carter emerged from the van carrying her medical bag and a small cooler. At 58, she moved with the efficiency of someone who had spent decades caring for animals. But there was a lightness to her step that hadn't been there 6 months ago. Speaking the truth had lifted a burden she'd carried too long. "How's my favorite patient?" she asked, kneeling beside Thunder's spot on the porch. The dog submitted to her examination with patient resignation, allowing her to listen to his heart and check his gums while keeping one eye on Bobby for reassurance. "Heart sounds strong and steady," Dr. Carter pronounced after several minutes. "The medication is working beautifully. At this rate, I'd say he's got several good years ahead of him." The words sent a wave of relief through Bobby that he felt in his bones. 3 months ago, he'd been facing execution. 6 months ago, he'd been counting down his final days. Now, suddenly, he was making plans that stretched years into the future, vacations with Maggie, gentle adventures with Thunder, maybe even getting involved in advocacy work for other wrongfully convicted prisoners. Thunder seemed to sense the good news, his tail thumping against the porch planks with renewed vigor. Dr. Carter reached into her cooler and produced a special treat, a frozen mixture of chicken broth and vegetables that she'd designed specifically for dogs with heart conditions. "Spoiling him again," Bobby observed with mock disapproval. "He's earned it," Dr. Carter replied simply. "You both have." As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the Tennessee hills, the small group settled into comfortable conversation about ordinary things: the weather, Maggie's garden, Thompson's retirement plans, Dr. Carter's new practice partner. Thunder dozed in his sunny spot, occasionally opening one eye to confirm that his people were still safely within sight. "Sometimes the good Lord saves the best for last," Bobby said quietly, echoing words his grandmother had taught him decades ago. He reached down to stroke Thunder's graying head, feeling the solid warmth of the dog's contentment. This was what happiness looked like after everything else had been stripped away. Not dramatic moments of triumph, but quiet afternoons spent with those who had proven their love through the hardest of times. Bobby and Thunder had found their way home at last, not just to a place, but to a peace they'd earned through loyalty, patience, and the kind of love that endures beyond all reason. Thunder's tail thumped once more against the porch, and Bobby knew that tomorrow they'd walk the creek path again, taking it slow, appreciating every step of the journey ahead. Sometimes life tests us in ways we never imagined, stripping away everything we thought we knew about fairness and justice. Bobby Mitchell spent 6 years on death row for a crime he didn't commit. But through it all, one loyal German shepherd named Thunder waited by the door every evening at 6 o'clock, never losing faith that his master would come home. Their story reminds us that love, the kind that asks for nothing and gives everything, can survive even the darkest chapters of our lives. As we grow older, we understand that time is precious, that second chances are rare gifts, and that sometimes the most profound relationships aren't with people at all, but with the four-legged companions who see our hearts with perfect clarity. Bobby and Thunder's reunion teaches us that it's never too late for justice, never too late for love, and never too late to start again. In a world that often feels cold and complicated, their bond reminds us of what truly matters: loyalty, hope, and the unwavering belief that tomorrow can be better than today. After all, sometimes the good Lord really does save the best for last. What four-legged friend has shown you unconditional love during your toughest times? Have you ever experienced a moment when hope seemed lost, only to find it again in the most unexpected way? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear about the loyal companions who've touched your heart.